In this video, I'm going to talk about the PI/VC performance response analysis. Performance response analysis appears in two locations in the PI/VC protocol. We encourage its application during the scope, context, and criteria stage of the project, and we also encourage its use during the risk assessment. The session covers performance response analysis, purpose, and possible performance response criteria. So why do we do this? I think the first question to really answer is, what is performance response? We consider performance response to be a reaction of a system to a stress, how that system responds, its change in its function, and how it may interact with a hazard. It informs how acceptable a risk is to the owner. Acceptable variations in performance measures are okay, but if they are not acceptable, that could lead to a potential risk outcome, and it's linked to our objectives. Why is it important? It's key in three stages of our work: defining system elements, defining hazards, and doing consequence analysis. It helps us define the response pathways that we're going to be worried about. Which hazards are we going to consider? The system elements, those that may respond to potential hazards, and our basis for scoring the risk itself. We only consider relevant system sensitivities, only for components in the system boundaries and within the time horizon of the assessment. And we ask questions like, how may this system fail? How will it respond? The goal is to understand the sensitivity of the system to climate hazards. We consider each infrastructure element, the climate hazards, and identify potential impacts of those climate hazards on the system. So now we're going to talk about the criteria. The PI/VC protocol gives a list of potential performance response criteria to consider. You can add or delete from this list as possible. I'm going to go through each of these criteria briefly. We can consider design. Systems are designed with specific climates in mind, and it can affect the way the system responds to a climate hazard. Or functionality. It's the ability of the system to achieve its design functions. Can the system do the job for which it was designed, even when exposed to a climate hazard? The service level. Climate events can impact systems and their ability to operate at desired service levels. It affects the system's performance and impacts on customers and the bottom line. Or maintenance. Events can impact our ability to do maintenance and follow through on our procedures. And so this can affect the overall performance of the system. Or safety concerns. Working in, on, or around the system. And it depends on the role. People who have to be there, people have the option to leave, or even visitors who may be at the site at the time of an incident. Our emergency response. Can we reach damaged systems or injured parties? Are there impacts on our emergency response and continuity planning? Gaps can amplify consequences. We consider the resources we have, the people and the equipment, our access and potential congestion during an event. Are there a lot of different emergency response organizations trying to reach the same spot at the same time? Insurance. We need to consider, are there possible impacts on our insurance rates, our ability to get insurance, potentially limitations and exclusions in our policies, what our current policies actually cover, and any potential third-party liabilities we may encounter. And how does our policy reflect in the risk profile? Could there be impacts on codes, on guidelines, on standards, our land use planning, public sector policies, operations and maintenance procedures? Do events or could events possibly put us out of compliance with any of these? And we need to consider social effects, evaluating possible impacts on access to critical services, transportation, energy supplies, potential population dislocations during an event. What are the basic services we absolutely have to provide? Considerations of business continuity, community and social assets, and historically significant resources, which may have a different risk profile than other systems. And we need to consider how the environment may be impacted during an event, possible impacts on toxic releases, air quality, ecosystems, wildlife, and water resources. And finally, we may want to consider the reputation of the organization. Poor response to a climate event can affect our reputation. Public dissatisfaction in our response can make budget approvals difficult, lead to loss of revenue, cost increase oversight from the regulators, leads to specific terms and conditions and approvals, and on and on. So in action, how does this actually work? There are a number of steps that we need to undertake. From a list of possible performance response indicators, the one that we just went through, identify those that address the objectives of the organization. Discard those factors that are not relevant. And add anything else that you may think is appropriate in this analysis. From our scope and context, list the objectives of the assessment. List the features of the system that are impacted or address these objectives. And we document our results. So here's a table that appears in the PIVC Large Portfolio Manual, which goes through this at a high level. So in this analysis, we're listing our objectives across the top. These are the objectives of the assessment. And then we list down the left-hand column performance response metrics that we wish to consider. And within the body of the table, we're looking at how these performance response indicators may interact with different management and physical features of the system. This gives us a handle on how the system is likely to interact with these performance response metrics. Where possible, we try to identify numerical metrics. Example, we have a target performance level of 98%, for example. And the event is going to reduce us below that level. How important is that to the organization? We identify the importance of changes in performance. How critical is it to not meet a particular performance target? And we identify descriptors for our non-numeric performance metrics. These are things where it's just difficult to quantify. So we would use professional judgment, for example, to come up with an assessment of how important it is to fail to meet this particular metric. Example, impacts would decrease our ability to meet these potential targets. Based on the above, we define scoring scales for the consequences of the impacts. Typically, it's a 1 to 5 scale, but users may use other scales as appropriate. Scales draw upon our risk appetite of the owner and the objectives of the assessment. It is important to understand that with different assessments, there can be different scale definitions. So the key points to take away from this particular video are: performance response criteria are based on scope, context of the assessment. It draws from the objectives of the assessment. It's the basis for consequence scoring definitions. And users may add, delete, adjust criteria based on the needs of their particular assessment.